are ready to go, then we could start, I guess.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this. So let's go.
All right. So welcome to our first ever live Q&A session on the global network of data officers and statisticians. My name is Alexander Loschke, and together with my colleague Yushi Zhang, we will moderate this Q&A session today. We are extremely happy to have today with us Stefan Schweinfest, the Director of the United Nations Statistics Division. And the aim of this Q&A session is to give you, our audience, the possibility to ask Stefan anything on the topic of statistics and data in all of its forms. Over the last days, we have received already a good number of questions. We have grouped those questions into topical areas, and we have also combined some of the questions when we have received very similar questions. We would so we have already received some questions, but we would like to encourage you all to ask also additional questions during the live Q&A session by replying to the same post on the global network, which you have just used to start this live video stream. We will then be happy to ask the questions for you to Stefan. Okay, so before we start now with the first segment, I would like to invite Stefan to briefly introduce himself to our audience. Stefan, over to you.
Hello and good morning from a snowy New York. I'm very happy to be with all of you. Thank you, Alex and Yushi and the whole team of the Global Network of putting this together. Hey, who says that the UN or statisticians cannot be innovative and modern? I like this platform. It's a little bit strange still for me that I'm talking to a machine, and I know there are lots of human beings all around the world in different time zones around. So thanks for coming, and thanks for bearing with us this morning, bearing with me as I'm still waking up and having my first cup of coffee. So I'm Stefan Schweinfest. Quick run through my CV. I was a nerdy child. I liked math and I liked languages, funny combination. Then I studied in France, in Paris and London, best time of my life. And then I thought, what do I do with this? And I took part in the international competitive exam for the United Nations, became a young statistician there. So I could use my math and my languages and my interest for international affairs and development. My father always accused me of professional tourism. He said you only took that job so that they can travel around, and he may not have been entirely wrong with that. I've always loved to travel in my private time, still doing that a lot. And then my professional story is quickly told. I joined the United Nations in 1989 through the Young Professional Exam, and I've been there for 32 years. And people may yawn and say, what's worse than 32 years of a statistician and at the UN? But I've always liked it. And of course, there were different phases. I started in national accounts. I did data work. I did methodological work on the system of national accounts for a couple of years. Then coordination work. I moved later from national accounts to the office of the director, and I did a lot of capacity building work, my real true passion in this job. And now since 2014, I've had the privilege of being the director of the statistics division. And the thing that gets me going is all the people around the world. I love the global statistical community. They are always interesting people to meet. And that's why I'm still here and still intending to stay for a little while.
Thank you, Stefan. As we said before, or as I said before, we have grouped your questions into several segments. So for this first segment, I would like to hand over now to my colleague Yushi. Yushi, please go ahead, ask the first questions to Stefan.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Stefan. Welcome, everyone. So, Stefan, let's start with COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on official statistics around the world. The global pandemic, as we know, has disrupted our personal and professional lives. So we see changes in the way statistics are produced, and we also see new statistics being produced to satisfy the data needs to combat the pandemic and its effect on society and economics. So my first question from our audience is, in your opinion, what are the greatest innovations in data work that have emerged as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? And what have we learned from this experience? Over to you.
No, thank you, Yushi. And this is, of course, a very, very pertinent, relevant question. We are in the middle of this crisis, and we were all, of course, caught off guard. And we were scrambling and struggling a lot, especially in the statistical offices, many of our classical operations have a lot to do with face-to-face contact. We were in the middle of the 2020 census. There are many surveys to be conducted, and all of these classical statistical operations were disrupted. And we had to very quickly adjust and find other methodologies, for instance, to conduct services online or through telephone. So I observed a lot of consternation, but also a lot of creativity. I think after an initial phase of adjustment, where we also all invested a lot in IT, even in my own office, because everybody was now working at home, we had to beef up our IT connections, jumping over the UN firewall from outside, and so that we can work on our databases. And these investments are here to stay. So that is actually a good thing. I think the one thing also I think which has improved is that we are using a lot more data sources, a large variety of data sources, innovative data sources. And we can talk about this a little bit more, I guess, later. And to help us to do official statistics. And I think that has broken down some barriers in the countries, and that will be also good for the future. One personal thing that I'm very excited about, as some people may know, the Statistics Division also has responsibility for the geospatial program and cartographic information and geospatial information since 2011. And I've been working on merging geospatial and statistical information and marrying these two communities, as I sometimes jokingly say. And nowadays, if you switch on the television, the first thing you see is a map and data. So I think statistics, numbers. I think this crisis has really made it clear how important it is to integrate geospatial and statistical numerical information, because it's not only, especially for the crisis, it's not for the health crisis, it's not only important how many infected people do we have, but where exactly they are, even down to the district in a city. So the distributional element that, of course, this geospatial information helps us to understand has been really highlighted by this crisis. And I think that's also something that is here to stay.
Thanks, Stefan. Yes, I also believe the geospatial information is quite important under this pandemic. And for participants, just a quickly reminder that you can lively post your questions under the live stream post on the global network as a comment. Then we can also read aloud your question during this live session. Okay, so the second question for Stefan is, where do you think the global statistical system has fallen short, and how can we do better in 2021?
Well, I mean, the one thing where we haven't fallen short, and I really want to highlight that, is that we came together as a community. I mean, the global statistical community is a community of solidarity. And I was very pleased to observe that in the crisis, even though on the political level and some other levels, countries are started to move apart from each other, or there was not such a collaborative approach in our area in statistics. There was a strong collaborative approach. We immediately created websites to help each other, For instance, on the census question, all of those countries, one of the things that UNSD did is connected all the countries that were in the middle of a census so that they could share their experiences on how to adjust quickly. And we developed methodology sheets, what to do with surveys, etc., etc. So I was really, really proud that the statistical community globally, which is a technical community, came together. Of course, we can always do more. And I think we have also discovered that some of our methods were perhaps screaming to be updated. And in a way, I have sometimes joked that the crisis COVID has forced us to jump finally into the 21st century. With our IT and our data exchanges and our data integration from different sources. These are going to be big challenges ahead of us, and there we still have to do better. And I think also we have to do better in explaining our data and communicating, because ultimately a good data item is a used data item. So we have to explain our users what they can do with our information. I sometimes say information because it's broader than just statistics. It includes big data, geospatial information. What can be done responsibly and what cannot or should not be done. So I think we have to get much more engaged and also defend and explain our data. And I think the questions of data ethics, data quality, data privacy, and I'm sure this will also come up, will become much, much more important. And we need to get more involved in that and really speak up also and communicate better with the users and the public at large, and also speak up when there are misuse of data or fake news. This is critically important, and it can distort the actions of entire countries, as we have observed.
Thanks, Stefan. And we do have a follow-up question. So based on your experience in the past year, what are the main challenges of the data collection caused by COVID-19?
Well, some of them I mentioned already. I mean, knocking on somebody's door in the census with a pencil in your hand and a piece of paper is really not a good idea. I think you will have a little bit of difficulties of getting people on your side. So some of the traditional data collection mechanisms need to urgently be revised, and we need to move to whatever telephone and perhaps online surveys. On the other hand, we have to be very aware that this introduces, of course, certain biases, because not everybody has a telephone and not everybody has a has online connection. We all know that. So, I mean, one of our fundamental policy tenets at this moment is to leave no one behind. And for us, this is critically important because we deliver the data. And the first step to leave people behind is if you don't count them, because I very much like the motto of a previous World Statistics Day that was said, everyone counts. And it has a beautiful double meaning. As an active activity, I mean, everybody is counting, but everybody is also important. I think I strongly, fundamentally believe in that. And we will have to adjust our data collection mechanisms to reflect that.
Thanks, Stefan. Yeah, and I also believe to adjust that to be probably the next normal. So this also brings us to our second segment today, which is about the next normal in the official statistics. So during the pandemic, we have seen that change and innovation can happen quickly. So if required, video conferencing, webinar, and e-learning courses, work from home, new ways of data collection, and the use of experimental data and big data has emerged. So, but how many of these changes will persist, and how will the next normal in official statistics looks like, and what will be the priority for the official statistics? So basically, our first question in this segment is about the next normal. So Stefan, how do you envision the next normal, or next normal as some call it, as it pertains to data work? Over to you.
Well, it was interesting. How this notion of the new normal or the next normal evolved. I think at the beginning we were all humanly very scared about the crisis, and we all hoped that we would get quickly back to where we were before, until there was a moment after 2, 3 months of crisis where it became very, very clear that we would never go back to that exact point where we were before the crisis. So now I think there's actually also I'm a very optimistic person, and there's a positive element to that. I mean, now we can, there's a great creative power to envisage this new normal, and I like the terminology very much. Now, in statistics, I mean, we touched already on a couple of things that I think many countries or institutions have been able to beef up their IT. That will, of course, stay. We have also learned, as I said, with the sudden increase of demand for data, crisis data, short-term data, medium-term data, and now the focus shifts a little bit gradually again to long-term data, not only crisis management data, but also, for instance, what is going to be the economic and social situation after the crisis? How are the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, going to be affected, and so on in the long run? So I think we start to focus on these issues again. And I think one of the things that everybody liked was that we became much more creative to use a large array of innovative data sources, private sources. Big data is a big topic, and as I said, also the integration with geospatial information, and that required different types of people to work together, because people who manage geospatial information have a different background, even speak a different language than hardcore statisticians. And the private sector, they produce data for a different reason than the official government public sector. And so it requires people to talk together and work together. And I think that is something that I hope will stay. Even though there was also, I heard, for instance, some concerns of chief statisticians in some countries that during the crisis they got access to data very, very quickly because of their government decrees. They got access to data from administrative records from other parts of the government, and then they got access to private data because the government just sort of said, you have to provide this information because of some crisis authority. And the statistical officers are worried whether in the future they will still have access to that information. Will government agencies still work together the same way when the pressure is not that high? Will private sector provide information, and what kind of information? The private sector pays a lot of money and invests into data. This has commercial value. It's precious for them. So how much of that will they give up for the public good? How can we anonymize individual data and so aggregate them? And so I think there are things to be figured out, but there are challenges. And the most important word that came out of the crisis, it was already discussed before the crisis, is data stewardship. I think national statistical offices are at this exciting moment in time. And I always say they're moving from a goods producer to a service producer. I mean, previously they produced goods, they produced public data, and they ran classical programs like a Census, and they did national accounts, and so, and that will continue because these things are public productions, and they will always be the backbone of any information architecture that a country has. But in addition, for newer areas, sometimes the statistical office is not the data provider. They may get data sets from somewhere else, let's say from the private sector. And their job then is to validate that information, to provide the service to the policymakers, to tell them how good or not good that information is. So I think the statisticians will become more and more not only producers, but also data advisors and data managers. Data stewards is actually a beautiful word. And we had discussed this. This already started before. And I mean, remember, big data has been discussed at the Statistical Commission since 2013. But the crisis has accelerated that, and I'm really looking forward to this new normal now, where I hope that some of the good elements will remain.
Thanks, Stefan. And now we have got some live questions. So first of all, Peter Abed from Beirut. So he asked, how can the National Statistics Office to help with information from census for the economic allocation to the saving accounts of hundreds of families in poverty? What do you think about this?
So, sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of the question.
Yeah. So Peter just asked, how can the National Statistics Office to help with the information from census for the economic allocation to the saving account of heads of households of families in poverty?
Well, I mean, the situation, in a way, it was a challenge, but also a blessing that we are doing the census right now, because I mean, it is very important, as I said earlier, in particular in the spirit of leaving no one behind, that we do have a full enumeration of the population. And in that, the census is unique and superior to everything else. Because, I mean, all of the ad hoc information collection, in order to know how good is big data, so we can only evaluate that if we have a big frame and we can actually refer it to something. So it's important that we have the census information. And the census is the population and housing census, so it also gives us also a snapshot of the living conditions and the living situations of countries. And of course, combined with other information of the statistical offices, I mean, like the income and expenditure surveys, and so it can help to identify really the most needy. I think that is, I expect, how the information will be used in order to allocate emergency aid.
Yes. Thanks, Stefan. And our second follow-up question is from Ian Cody from UK. So he asked, how can we ensure that statistical offices continue to invest in innovation and new data sources beyond the COVID-19 response and don't fall back to more traditional methodologies?
That is a very, very good question, and I think the answer to that is educated users. I mean, that maintain the pressure on the statistical office, and I think there is a lot of work to be done between the statistical data producers and the users, because some users, let's be frank here in a friendly chat, are also irresponsible or are in the sense that they are only looking for certain type of information for an advocacy goal that they may be having, and that's legitimate from their side point of view. But I mean, that is not a guidance note for general statistical production for the public good. So I think there has to be a lot more dialogue between the different types of users and between the users and the statistical offices. And I think if the users keep up the pressure on the statistical offices to come up with innovative information, then we have a chance. But there has to be also a commitment of the society to empower the statistical officers to do that work, because I mean, you cannot be innovative if your budget is continuously slashed. And I know that many of my colleagues who are managing national statistical offices are struggling with that. That on the one hand, the demand for data is going through the roof, and on the other hand, the support for data production is going down. There has to be an appreciation, a general appreciation in the society of the value of good information. And if there is that appreciation that there is value to good information that helps the common good and individuals and groups and municipalities to take good investment decisions, then I think there would be also a willingness to invest in this. I always say good information is not necessarily cheap. It doesn't fall from the roofs. Maybe some sources are easily accessible, but validating them is still a worthwhile process and may require investment in terms of scientific processes and so on and so forth to review information. So if we all appreciate the value of data, make a common commitment into investment in good data, and if the users keep us on our toe, I'm quite hopeful that in the future we will continue with this innovative path.
Thanks, Stefan. And since you mentioned that innovation during the pandemic and after the pandemic should be really important, and also you mentioned the private sector might also contribute to the data source. So now let's talk now about the priorities for the official statistics in the short term. And since we have received some questions regarding the growing community of data producers and issues surrounding data privacy. So the first question is, some UN entities often use data from partners, such as Facebook or Google, given the ability of this company to collect the prices and often real-time data. So in working with those companies, how do we ensure the data privacy and the well-being of millions of people, especially those in crisis situation, whose voice are not always heard on this topic? Over to you, Stefan.
No, I think this is a very, very important question, and we really need to spend a lot of thinking in that in the future. And it is going to be difficult to find the right balance. I mean, first of all, I always say I always said it was a Superman principle, that is, with great powers comes great responsibilities. But obviously, I got my movie wrong, because somebody once corrected me that it's Spider-Man. So whoever said it, some of those Supermans, said something very wise. With great power comes great responsibility. Now we are at a time where it is possible to have a lot of information on the individual. I mean, we can cross information, geospatial information, and household surveys, and so on and so forth. It becomes increasingly difficult to protect the privacy of people, and the attitude towards privacy is also changing. Maybe younger people are quite more willing to share information about themselves and their lives and their preferences publicly than the previous generation, and even there may be cultural differences. So we need to all factor that in. And then there is a fundamental dilemma about the privacy, for instance, for vulnerable population groups. On the one hand, we need the information on vulnerable population groups in particular to take them into account and focus policies on them and direct them to them, any kind of policy that would support them. On the other hand, of course, vulnerable population groups are vulnerable, just as the term expresses. And I think we have to be very careful that the information that we generate does not make them at some point more vulnerable. We also always have to bear in mind that the information that we generate is now there to stay. And it's not only the current users that will look at this information. It may be that there's a change in government. Maybe there is a very benevolent government right now, but there may be a different government 10 years from now. And if the information is still there and accessible, vulnerable groups could be hurt. So, and that has happened in history. I mean, I studied the example of the German census from the 1930s, where the information on religious community affiliation was used later on for horrible consequences. So I think we have to take this privacy question very, very seriously. On the other hand, information, as I said, even at the low level, is very valuable. So I think we have to find anonymization techniques and responsible data storage ways and responsible ways of giving access to information, who exactly has access to what type of information. So that requires a lot of data governance, and this is again where the government and the statistical offices are challenged to become active. Um, so that we do get that right balance, that the information for the individuals and small groups and especially vulnerable groups is used for good purposes and good policies, and is at the same time protected so that it cannot now and not ever in the future be abused.
Thanks, Stefan. And I see that we still have one question regarding the data stewardship, but I believe you already answered this topic in your previous answer. So now I'm like to hand over to Alex to talk about more on the roles of UN statistical system in 10 years. So over to you, Alex.
Sorry, I was muted. Still happens after 11 months in quarantine. It still happens that one is muted when it's time to speak. Sorry for that. So thanks, Yushi, for asking those questions. Yeah, I also saw that there was a question also about big data and the positive and negative sides of this of those developments. So we covered, I think, the issue of big data quite well. But there was also a part of that question which I would like to take, which was about citizen-generated data and administrative data. How do you see the developments in those areas? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
I think this is very important. I mean, citizen-generated data are critical. I had one beautiful example, because I deal with so many different issues, so that it's interesting that you get these different perspectives. I mean, I'm also responsible, for instance, for the area of geographical names, and some people may ask, why is that now relevant? But at one point we had a discussion that each country needs to have a gazetteer, a listing of all the geospatial names, geographical names in its boundaries. Of course, how all the villages or the mountains and whatever are called, and that would be the official names. But then they said there is also citizen-generated data, how some of these places are referred to in the local community, and that may not be the official names. And why is that relevant? Well, it's very simple. If there's a crisis, if there's an earthquake and humanitarian aid is on its way, and somebody who sits in a truck asks for this village and it's the official name, and somebody in the local area is not familiar with that designation or something like that, but refers to that same place with a local name, it is very important to also know all of the local names, to have that citizen-generated data as a complement to the official information. And that leads me to, I like the expression information architecture. I think people are much more intelligent than we always assume. They can deal with more complex information architectures, not just one thing. And the answer in many cases on many good questions is very often it depends. And it depends on the use. It depends on the use information, use situation. So citizen-generated data may be biased to the local needs and may not comply with may be biased from a positive perspective that the citizen has in a specific area, and may not comply with some global standards of how information is compiled, but it has its value in the specific local context. So I think as we need information to manage the society at the local level, municipality level, at the regional level, at the national level, at the continental level, and at the global level, I think we have to get used to building what I call an information pyramid and an information architecture. And with the power of information technology, we can make sure that the right information pieces are connected with each other. But I think we need a backbone of official statistics, which are good for national policy making and for global policy making. There's increasingly global policy making, oceans and climate change. We cannot manage individually in countries and so. But there is also a lot of local management. And I think at the local level, citizens should definitely have a place at the table to provide the information that points also to critical policy needs.
Thanks. Let me follow up with one question regarding the relationship between users and national statistical offices and how the UN agencies can support this dialogue on statistical literacy. So what can the UN system do to help the NSOs to improve statistical literacy?
Well, I think the first thing is already a realization that use is important. I mean, I said that earlier. We had perhaps a traditional philosophy that a good statistical item is one that has been triple checked and quadruple checked. And this is our tendency as classical statisticians. And then we put it in a database or we put it into a publication, and then it was sitting on the shelf. And we did no longer feel responsible what happens after that. And that is fundamentally wrong. Actually, our fundamental principles, which by now are almost 30 years old, they say that we have a responsibility in commenting on misuse of information. So it's already there that we are also responsible for what happens after the data are produced, the use. And many statistical offices are already doing that, but perhaps even us as UNSD, we have been more focusing on connecting national statistical offices on the production side and how you do national accounts and environment statistics and censuses and surveys, etc., and gender statistics, and all of this is very, very important. But I mean, there is also a lot of experience, and perhaps there may be some guidelines, and there are guidelines in our new handbook on statistical management and organization. There is also a big focus on the user dialogue and user education and experiences that this is the beautiful thing of the United Nations. I mean, we don't invent the solutions. We get to invite countries from around the world to present the solutions that they have found, the experiences that they have made. And they are really fun things. I mean, how certain countries have really courses for journalists or train certain journalists who become then multipliers and interpreters of the very complex information that we produce. And also how they invest in schools. I believe very much in education and the next generation. I mean, how some statistical offices have certain publications and releases that are specifically targeting children. And all of these things, I think there are good practices out there. The UN Statistics Division can collect them, can connect countries, and can strengthen also in the dialogue. When I go and visit a country, for instance, it very often happens that I have the privilege of having a catalytic impact too, because I'm then often welcomed. I'm not a very ceremonial person, but I mean, if I have this high-level position, why not use it? And I get received by a minister or a vice minister, and I get an opportunity to also appeal to them to improve the culture of the use of data and help the national statistical offices to also invest in those capabilities, to have a communication a team that is part of a statistical office and outfit.
Thank you so much, Stefan. I see we still have quite a good number in the pipeline, number of questions in the pipeline, and we will come to more questions after the following segment. But first, I would like to ask you now, as we are roughly in the middle of our event today, I would like to ask you a series of 10 short questions.
Okay.
And I would like to ask you to answer those questions as spontaneously as possible, and to answer them maybe with only a few words, really one or two, or maybe a very short sentence. So
You know what you're doing. You're asking a German UN statistician to be spontaneous. I think that's. I'm always spontaneous on Wednesday afternoons between 4:12 and 4:17.
Yeah, let's try. Maybe we can also do it on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock here in New York. So, which languages do you speak?
English, French, Spanish, and German, and I studied a little bit of Chinese. Find it fascinating.
What was your favorite subject in school? I think you have touched on that already, but you can.
I always said M&M, math and music, and I think the two have a lot more in common than people normally think.
What is your favorite word in statistics?
That's a difficult one. My favorite word in statistics: quality.
Good. What is your least favorite word in statistics?
Control.
Who inspired you to work in statistics?
Actually, I would say it was a math teacher that talked to us a lot about not only the beauty of math and numbers, but also the responsibility to make them work for people.
If you hadn't worked in statistics, what other job would you have liked to work in?
Oh, I always wanted to be a teacher, and I think I'm still half of a teacher in this job that I have. But my original idea was to become a math and French teacher.
If you hadn't worked in the UN Statistics Division in New York, where in the UN would you have liked to work?
Oh, definitely in the regional commissions in Latin America, either in Mexico or in Chile, in Santiago.
Which is your favorite band?
My favorite band. Oh God, that dates me. I'm from the last century, the Beatles. I'm a Beatles person.
Which is your favorite city?
Sydney, Paris.
The field of statistics aside, who's the most inspiring person for you?
Oh, I was always fascinated by Nelson Mandela.
Thanks so much, Stefan, for answering those 10 short questions. You've done fabulous, and you have shown that Germans can be spontaneous, I guess, even at 8 o'clock in the morning. Sorry, 9. So let's move now to the following segment. So we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming Statistical Commission, which will be conducted for the first time using a virtual format. This gives, of course, many colleagues the opportunity to participate in the Statistical Commission for the first time, and also in the numerous side events. So maybe you can give us a little bit your personal choice of highlights of the Statistical Commission. I would like you to start maybe with the side events. Which side events of the Statistical Commission, which will happen now between February and March, are you looking forward to the most?
Well, I have to be a little bit dutiful also. I mean, I mentioned our high-level side events, and they are on the topics that we already discussed: data stewardship and COVID response, and they are related to each other. And I want to move this community to look forward. I mean, and get out of this crisis response mechanism. Of course, we are still in the middle of a crisis, and we need to responsibly manage it. But you can't manage your way out of a crisis if you don't have a long-term vision, and one day the crisis is over and you come out of the dust and you need to know where you are and where you're going. So I think the long-term investment in national information architectures and capacity building, I'm very worried about this. I think we were not nearly investing enough in data globally. We're having discussions with the World Bank on a global data facility, and these things will come up at the Statistical Commission, and I'm very, very excited to move these things forward and discuss this. One should not forget, and I always wanted to say the Statistical Commission has a specific functions. Ultimately, it's a statistical global parliament, and it adopts standards and norms. That sounds a little bit boring, but I mean, the fact that we can even talk to each other globally in terms of censuses or national accounts is a tremendous accomplishment. And I always say the Statistical Commission is one of those quiet areas where the United Nations actually really, really works and has done a lot of good work. And these standards and norms are very important. So the adoption of a methodology is critical work of the Statistical Commission. And I think here we are going to adopt the ecosystem accounts under the system of integrated economic and environmental accounting. So this is a big step forward. It may not generate so much excitement to adopt a standard and a norm, but I mean, this is really the foundational work that we are doing, and that's also something I'm looking forward to.
Thanks, Stefan. So you talked already now about the Statistical Commission itself. On this long list of side events that we're conducting, is anything there where you would say, okay, you have to go there, you have to listen to those people?
Well, I mean, I think you are going to do a side event, aren't you?
Yes, we're going to do a side event actually on the global network, and also on ways how the UN system and UNSD can help resident coordinator offices and the UN country teams to work and together with the national statistical systems, and how to connect and collaborate better. So this is, yeah, from our point of view, for sure one of the highlights. Let me maybe take the advantage also to ask one question. So as I have said, so we have this virtual format this year, and of course this is nothing that anybody has really wanted, and we already know what are the so that more people can participate. But can you say a little bit more about the advantages and disadvantages of this format?
No, the virtual format, of course, is imposed of us, and it's not perfect. I think I very often use the terminology community and family. And what happens at the Statistical Commission is not only what happens in the formal meeting. What happens is that many people go out for dinner and wine together. They may go to a concert together in New York. They have coffee together. The Viennese coffee shop in New York next to the conference room is perhaps the most important place for the Statistical Commission. So all of these human interactions will that allow us bilateral, trilateral meetings from the regional groups and so on and so forth, forming a strong sense of solidarity, professional solidarity. All of that will be missing. So that is terrible, and I will miss it tremendously. And it also has practical implications. I mean, sometimes we are negotiating and we need to create a consensus, for instance, on an international recommendation, and there are more than one possible and good solution. So people need to have space to have discussions and work out a good consensus, a good compromise. That will be very hampered. So this, in that sense, it's bad. But I mean, of course, in life, not everything is bad. The good thing is that we can bring a lot more people to the table. I mean, even within the statistical offices, not only the chief statistician and perhaps one or two very high-level people will be able to come to the Statistical Commission, but younger professionals, everybody will come to the Statistical Commission. Everybody, even around the globe, can, if they really have nothing better to do, they can watch round of Statistical Commission. And one thing that I'm particularly excited about, I asked my staff to make me a list of countries who have never been at the Statistical Commission or have not been able to come in the last 5 years. And I'm writing a letter actually today. I have the draft already on my desk to those countries and say, maybe for whatever reason you were not able to come ever or not in the last 5 years, maybe resources most of the time. But this year, the Statistical Commission is just a push of a button away. So I want to make, this is my personal goal, this the Statistical Commission where the most number of countries have participated ever in the history. We normally have about 120 to 140 countries coming to the room together, and imagine that. That is already spectacular. But it means that there are still 50, 70 countries missing. So this year, I want to get as many countries as possible connected to the global community.
Thanks so much, Stefan. We have about 10 minutes left in our event. Maybe we can go 2 or 3 minutes over time, but let's move to the following segment, which is on the global network where this event today is actually happening. So people are watching it now, being connected to this new global network of data officers and statisticians. And I wanted to ask you one question about your views on the global network, and how do you see the role of the global network? How was the role of the global network during the pandemic, and how did it support the global community?
Well, I'm very happy that we have this global network. It came at the right moment. I mean, it is a little bit connected to the pandemic. The pandemic may have accelerated the coming together of people, but I hope that even without a pandemic, there people would have recognized that there is great value to, apart from all the official mechanisms that bring us together, to a more informal, playful, I would almost say, platform where people who are interested in these topics come together. I was just thinking yesterday, I mean, when I was a kid, I always wanted to go to the Forum Romanum. I always was very fascinated by what happened in Rome, that people would come together, and it was like a marketplace, and they would discuss, and they would mingle, and they would do high politics. I mean, this concept of the Forum Romanum has always fascinated me, and this is a little bit, the global network has that. It should be just a fun place to come together and for people, but also it can be an organized fun place to come together where people address real questions, share experiences, and I think this has happened during the pandemic, and that is extraordinarily valuable. And we have had discussions how we can help to make this even happen even more. Perhaps there is a possibility of segmenting the global network and creating sub-networks where people come together. But I'm also very aware that we should not over choreograph it. I mean, it should, to use a word that you used earlier, should remain a little bit spontaneous and demand and user driven. And I think then it will definitely function best.
Yes, thanks, Stefan. So, yeah, as you have mentioned, segmentation or diversification of the global network is for sure one of the things that will happen over the course of next months as people start creating their own groups for specific use cases. Can you touch maybe a little bit on use cases that you can see for the global network, where you really hear of the.
Well, I think some of the things we discussed earlier, I mean, I think the network, it becomes the more valuable, the more heterogeneous the people are that are in there, because it just broadens the base of knowledge that is actually represented there and the potential of dialogue and so. So I think if there are subgroups formed around common themes, I mean, I heard that there is one of a very active discussion already. I mean, about the challenges of artificial intelligence. So people who are sort of so inclined and are forward-looking and philosophically thinking, and perhaps also a little bit IT oriented, and so they can come together and discuss in that corner. Or perhaps the topic of integration of, if we also get some geospatial information people into the group, maybe they will be most interested in how to connect better to the statistical community and integrate the information and address common challenges, for instance, of data privacy, data governance, data use, etc., etc. So the potential is endless, and I mean, because also I like that the network at this point in the initial phase is very broad. It has junior professionals, it has senior professionals, it has professionals from different parts of the world. Maybe also people want to come together regionally because they have some cultural issues that are specific to their part of the world. And that is, of course, something that we always do at the United Nations.
Thanks. We have one question here which came from a member of a resident coordinator office. And he was asking, what role do you see for the resident coordinator offices in strengthening national statistical systems' capacity to monitor the progress on the 2030 agenda? And what support can UNSD provide resident coordinator offices to assist in this process?
No, this is a very important question. I was always saying, I mean, those who are familiar with the United Nations in New York, the buildings, we are in the so-called DC2 building, that's the statistical office, and in the DC1 building, there is the UNDP, all the operational activities. So and I always said the biggest distance in the United Nations is between the DC1 and the DC2 building. The United Nations has one apparatus that is global and headquarters oriented, and we are part of that with the Statistical Commission and the Statistics Division and the generation of knowledge and methodologies and norms and capacity building and so. And then, of course, the United Nations has a very, very big part that is operational. All the country teams, all the people working on the grounds, all the funds and programs, the specialized agencies that provide invaluable support to countries and regions in their fields of expertise. And bringing this all together is always a big challenge. I mean, I don't envy the Secretary General who has the ultimate job to hold this all together. In the area of statistics, this has always been a concern of mine because sometimes country teams are trying to help the government, and then they are talking to the government, and they are sometimes not even aware of that there is a specialized office, namely us, the Statistics Division, sitting in New York. So if the government turns to the country team and says we need help in environment statistics or environment accounting, and we don't know what to do there, sometimes then it happens in the UN system that somebody locally hires a consultant and tries to help the government. And that's, of course, a very laudable and good approach to do things. But I think the connection needs to be made to the global knowledge. We have generated a lot of information. And I think we have now a task team under the UNSDG working on exactly that, that we provide a website where all the knowledge that the country teams need, and I'm very happy that we now have these data officers so that there is one person in the UN country team who is designated to feel responsible, not to be a super statistician, but perhaps to become the focal point and to become the connection. And what we really need in the future is a triangular communication between the National Statistical Office and the national authorities. They are, of course, the ultimate target that we all want to help. Between us globally, I talk to them. I talk to the chief statisticians because they come to my statistical commission, but also with the country team, so that we can benefit from the local knowledge and this local understanding of their circumstances and address the needs, and at the same time don't do it in an ad hoc fashion, but make sure that every country gets the state-of-the-art support according to international standards and guidelines. So that would be the ideal situation. And there we still have a lot of work to do because the country teams and the headquarters, and I'm not only talking about statistics, they are not always very well connected. Even as young professionals, they are very different personalities. Those who are in the country teams, they are often like the foreign affairs people. They move around. Whereas we as headquarter, we sit here for 30 years in the same office and acquire in-depth experience and knowledge, which is also valuable for the organization and necessary. But now we need to bring these things really together so that we can best support the countries. And a network like this one, where people start talking to each other, is very, very important to actually make the information flow.
Yeah, thanks. We are slowly running out of time, but I would like to take one more question, which is related to humanitarian emergencies. So we have a question here from the International Organization for Migration. So in humanitarian emergencies and also during the recovery period, there are often gaps in updated demographic data on population, persons in needs, etc. Especially in the area of conflict that see rapid demographic change because of forced displacement and migration. There's we have some good examples where humanitarian actors are working with existing local actors. I'm curious in knowing if the global network has ideas or plans in promoting data best practices in those complex environments as well.
Well, I mean, the mere fact that you're raising the issue is already a valuable contribution. And I would hope that in the network, look, I mean, fundamentally in life, all the solutions depend on cooperation of the right people. And you normally need a diverse group in a room together to find the best solution. And here in this topic of migration statistics, we have a whole program on migration statistics, but I have on my desk a proposal for a cooperation agreement between us and the IOM. And we are working very closely with their statistical operations because, of course, they have valuable information from their operations. They collect data differently from our classical statistical operations. And of course, migration is a particularly challenging situation because by definition, two countries are involved. And by definition, the circumstances of these people are extremely challenging and vulnerable and require quick support. Whereas the official statistical production is often more oriented to the medium and long term. Again, we need to work on this together. National Statistical Office, international agencies that are involved in humanitarian support, and put all of our information and resources together on the table and create the best information architecture that both can address short-term needs, because I mean, one in migration, there can maybe a question, how do I feed all of these people? How do I provide vaccines for all of these people? And that needs to be decided very, very, very quickly. But there are also long-term migration-related questions. I mean, for instance, if somebody has the theory that people who migrated into a country, even 10 years after they are there, they are still being disfavored or discriminated against in terms of social and economic status, you need very different data. You need solid classical economic and social data to analyze a question like that. And that is also migration related. So even in the area of migration, there are short-term questions, there are long-term questions. And that's why we need a whole, I'm coming back to that mantra, an information architecture that from short-term big data to long-term solidly statistically generated data to address the whole topic of migration and any topic that is by definition complex and long-term. Because the one thing I also want to say, we are measuring development. One of my favorite lines is, we are not taking pictures, we are not taking photos, we are making a movie. And that is why statisticians sometimes have to be also a little bit conservative. They don't just go in at one moment in time and quickly take a picture, but they need to they come back 5 or 10 years later, and we need to make sure that certain methodologies are kept constant so that we can actually make an accurate assessment of what has changed, because that's the real question we are addressing in the long term.
Thanks so much, Stefan. We have come to the end of the allotted time, so I would like to take this. I would like to thank you now in the name of UNSD as the organizer of this event today, but especially in the name of all the participants who have watched and who have asked the questions to you. Thanks everybody who has asked the question. Those questions were all really, really great. And yes, I think we still might have talked about a couple of questions, and we will try to answer those in the coming hours together with Stefan and his team to make sure that no question stays unanswered. Thank you again, Stefan. Thank you also to Yushi and all the colleagues in the background who made this event today possible. And see you next time. Thank you. And have a look at our announcements for the Statistical Commission's side events over the next coming days. Thanks.
No, thank you to putting it all together. It was fun on my side. Take care. Have a good day and evening wherever you are.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.